We're with Cézanne Charles, curator of ArtX Detroit, and talking about an ArtX program called Living X. Cézanne, thanks for talking to One Detroit.
Thank you so much for having me.
But let's do a little background first. What is ArtX Detroit?
So ArtX Detroit really began, and most people will be familiar from it, from the 3 editions that Midtown Detroit spearheaded and led through 2011 and 2015. Most of the projects really centered on the 36 Kresge Artist Fellows and then the 2 eminent artists of every sort of cycle of that program. And it really was an opportunity for those artists to showcase their work within the sort of Midtown, downtown, and Eastern market footprint. So always new commissions, always jam-packed events, either over 5 or 10 days. So it was a real opportunity to sort of reimagine this as a platform that could take place in the neighborhood.
Art out of the neighborhoods of Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park, curated as Living X, the X a multiplier in math terms, but also for an undefined value. Cézanne Charles says we've been living in unprecedented times, even before the coronavirus. Living X would reflect urgency and the emergence of artists of the neighborhoods.
And then you end up with 22 projects, art projects. That's seems like a lot.
It definitely is. I think one of the things that we really embraced about this idea is that if we were going out into the neighborhoods, we didn't actually have to sort of adhere to the idea of a traditional festival format where it took place within, either a single month or a 5 to 10 day period. We could really sort of think about this as a sort of decentralized kind of festival where the artists themselves could be supported to self-produce projects in neighborhoods that they're familiar with, that they either live in or work in, or really had important stories to tell from.
Well, let's talk about a few of those projects. What really stands out in your mind? I know above the others. There's so many.
Above the others.
Sure you don't.
Well, I can never say above the others, but what I will say is what really struck me was the diversity of the kind of stories coming out of neighborhoods and coming out of, the way that artists sort of are already part of community. I think one of the ones that stands out for me really is Fly Drown, and the way that, they invite, an audience into these really intimate Black domestic spaces, based on the kind of vernacular single family home, but then really show the way that those spaces were the spaces where you could process grief, you could process trauma, you could process the lived experience of having to walk outside that door into a city that sometimes wasn't really welcoming. But inside those interior spaces, it was really a place where you could sort of feel the full soul of the Black experience in Detroit.
There were some others, including Neighborhood on the Edge. Talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, so Neighborhood on the Edge is, again, these unique stories and audio portraits coming from people who are currently living in a neighborhood that's going through so much influx and so much transformation, right? Especially as we sort of consider the redevelopment in that town.
There were some films involved with Living X this year.
Yeah, we do have a couple film projects, and one of them is by Julia Yazbek, who is an artist who really was documenting and wanting to kind of tell a story about 2 very, very different, but also very similar cities that, both form a part of her sense of belonging and identity. Those cities were Detroit as well as Beirut in Lebanon. As a result of both the work that she's already doing, but also, of course, with the events of the day. And I think that that's really some of the power of the work that artists do in ways that are often unexpected. They can be very prescient about what our world is telling us, right? And what's happening, both intimate scales and really sort of grand and narrative scales.
The Living X exhibition's done, except for a few that couldn't be finished because of the pandemic. This month, it's a look back at what was. More from the artist, a book, a podcast discussing the work, and an online event on Wednesday.
So that'll all come out. The book and the podcast series will kind of launch at the same time through an event on August 19th from 6:30 to 8, where we'll also have an opportunity to not just, showcase both the book and the podcast, but to really also, again, do what we do best, which is let the artists speak for themselves.
Well, Cézanne Charles, Living X curator with ArtX Detroit, thanks for talking to One Detroit.
Thank you so much.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.